right, there we go. Hey everyone, Richard Carlton here. Welcome to another great day of FileMaker training at fmtraining.tv. I'm the creator of fmtraining.tv, where you can learn all about the FileMaker platform and learn how to build better FileMaker applications for you, your customers, your organization. This broadcast is completely free to everyone and is being broadcast in high definition to Discord, YouTube, and to Twitch. This broadcast is being recorded, which is really great. Of course, we might clean up the recording a little bit, so if we make a malfunction during the live stream, then of course we reserve the right to clean that up on the recording later on. However, because it's a live broadcast, we encourage you to ask questions. In fact, some people get aggravated when there's this dialogue with you and we ask questions. We want questions. If you have a question, odds are other people have the question too. And so I want to thank everyone for logging in, Ken and TK and Dave One, Dave Learning, Ed, Elzo, Carol, Jake, Mike, all of you, welcome once again to another great broadcast. Now, as a reminder, if you want to check out the upcoming broadcast, go to fmtraining.tv, press the left tab for the live button. You can see the upcoming broadcast schedule. That's pretty awesome. Additionally, if you want to help support this channel, right? We always say this, this broadcast is brought to you by fmtraining.tv, bringing you the greatest and the most entertaining FileMaker training videos available. So the idea is that if you want to help support the channel, make sure you check out our on-demand video bundles. We have videos that cover the latest version of FileMaker. We have videos that cover the deploy course. In fact, we used to sell the courses individually. Anymore, it's just much simpler to sell a complete bundle for a low price. We do this on an annual basis. So if you buy one of the bundles, that really helps support the channel. It ensures that we can keep coming back every day because this broadcast actually takes a lot of money to run. The people here don't work for free.
Hi, Jacob. How are you doing? How's life?
I'm doing great. How's your day going?
Well, it was pretty good up until this moment in time where everything
About
decided to
45
crash.
seconds ago? Yeah.
Yeah.
I see that.
Well, that's pretty appropriate for today's topic, where everything's like really fine until it's not.
Yeah, it's precisely on point actually, since we're talking about disaster recovery planning. So, Margaret, would you care to walk us through what your process is?
My process?
Let me reverse the role of presenter and.
My process is be informed that something has disastrously gone wrong, or actually it wasn't even before that because I know something was wrong. And then I did like the initial fix, which has historically worked, and then the historical fix didn't work. So then the panic begins to set in because I don't have a plan after the initial fix doesn't work. So if, step one, fix doesn't work, step two, panic, chatter randomly at people, and then begin unplugging and replugging various objects until something eventually works, which is not a good plan, you guys.
Excellent example. It's perfect and on topic for today. And I say that entirely in jest. Obviously, you can't do anything about some of this stuff. One of the biggest. I'll start with a summary of what I want to say today. It's a little, paean or a quote or whatever. But plans are worthless. Planning is essential, and so. If you take nothing else away from today, that's what I want you to kind of get out of it. That's kind of why I jokingly asked Margaret about that, is because, you have what you expect to happen, right? We can sit down and say, all right, I have an on-site server. I'm just jumping into it. I have a little more structure that'll come after this, but you start and you say, all right, I have an on-site server. There's certain sorts of disasters I can imagine or envision that might happen to that. And then you can sit down and plan for those and like who would do what would they do, what kind of steps, maybe who needs to be told about that, stuff like that. If there's users you need to inform, hey, we're restoring from a backup, like, you're going to lose data after some timestamp or whatever. Okay, perfect. Like, then you need to have a protocol in place for letting those people know. When with a live stream like this, the process may be, all right, we're going to stop, recognize that there's a problem, and analyze the problem, which is we have a blue screen on 2 of our streaming platforms. and then come back to it and say, all right, we're going to try the quick fix. Quick fix doesn't work. Got to try the longer fix. Okay, the more disruptive one. That would be, kind of an analog for that with a FileMaker server is something is misbehaving versus the server has crashed. Sometimes the quick fix, if you're in a virtual environment, maybe you just need more disk space, a little extra memory or something like that, where it's a quick to identify, reasonably quick to resolve, versus we're totally, you come back into the server and we're completely outside of our operating parameters. And so you're like, okay, what should we be doing here? So I'm going to share. All right, I'm going to put my notes on my screen so I can see them, because I made a lot of them. Yeah. And we'll have a document and some notes and stuff that come after this. Margaret went and hunted down a kind of a guideline document for what a disaster recovery process looks like, and it's extensive. It's 6 or 8 pages. I've got it over here somewhere, and so it goes in kind of a more enterprise scenario with, you need to identify all of the different people who are going to do it. What are the steps to identify what the problem is? What are the steps to identify what the resolution is? If there's a quick resolution versus a longer term resolution, who needs to be told, et cetera, like all of that stuff. And you can document out, like, here are the steps. Here's who needs to be called. Here's their phone numbers, that kind of stuff. And so if you want to take it, professionally in that way, then you can sit down and document a plan. You will need to update those on some schedule as well. I don't know, the FileMaker server admin console has changed between 16 and 18, so you'd want to have updated the directions in case it's not your FileMaker expert that's trying to do that process, execute that plan. So the main thing, though, I'll start with kind of the structured part of this. The main thing that I want to get across today is, like I said, plans are worthless. Planning is essential. So you want to think about what you have now, which would be a little bit like an asset inventory. And that covers everything from the server, the hardware needed, your FileMaker. You want to check the configuration of it, like what's your RAM stuff set at. We're always talking about the RAM cache for tuning, but if you need to, if your disaster is unnecessarily exciting and you end up needing a new machine as a result of it, then you need to be able to bring all of those configurations over. So if you have web code, that needs to be present in your backups. You need to ensure that's the case. If you have on-site and off-site backups, they need to be checked. 1, that they're running. That's great. 2, test them. If you're like RCC does, we zip up the databases and put them somewhere. You need to test those zips, like open them up, extract the database, open it, like in Pro. Confirm that the database operates, that there's nothing wrong there for some reason. Doing stuff like that, you don't have, it's not, don't do it all the time, whatever, but every month or, on some similar schedule, go and check. For customers that want that, we have a service. RCC has a service where we will do that for you on your FileMaker servers. But that's all it is. It's we go in, you verify system health, you verify that the database backups appear to be running correctly, and then you manually verify that they are in fact running correctly. Not that the software is operating, but that the database actually works. It's the where the rubber meets the road part of the conversation. Lots of IT departments over the years have been very surprised when they get themselves up to their waist in water to find out that their backups, which, actually have been running successfully for 5 years or whatever, were not useful because there was something messed up with the backup system. It's not specific to FileMaker per se, but it's something a lot of people run into where they never tested the backups at all. And so you don't know that they work until you've literally tested them. And that's either, for some other types of applications, you might do a mock restoration of some sort on a test system or something like that. For FileMaker, it's probably sufficient to grab one of the backups, open it up in Pro, and get on with it. Cool. All right, just checking Discord to see if there's any comments or anything I needed to respond to.
Nope.
So next thing. So when we'll say, as a mock example, you're the IT guy. We'll say it's me, but you're the IT guy. You come in, you've gotten this call, hey, a customer system is down. We don't know what's wrong. There's a couple things that you need to do at that point. One is identify, all your details to get into the server if you have them, or if the customer has them. If you don't, well, you're starting behind. That's exciting. Don't do that. Get all your credentials together. That kind of stuff should be in your plan. And so your plan can be very light. Your disaster recovery plan, essentially. Your plan can be very light. It can be a sheet of paper that you keep somewhere safe that has relevant credentials on it, maybe a couple of paths to where data should be, right? What's your database directory, so that your business is on fire and you have something to reference. You're like, you get performance anxiety and you're like, I don't know where the data is supposed to go. I don't know where the backups are. Oh Lord. And people freeze up, and that's very real. It's one of the reasons that we tell people, make a punch list, check your punch list, test your punch list, which means operating it. You go running through it either in mock, or if you can take the system down on a weekend to do a practice run at some point. That's important, not least to do once, but if it's a big company and you make lots of money, you should be doing something like that regularly. If you're a big enough company, maybe you have test systems for stuff like that, and you're not taking down the production system for that. But either way, you should practice that on some schedule, because people get out of practice. You have new members of the team that might be responding to it. They've never worked with the system. Maybe they're super experts at Windows and backup restorations and all this other stuff, data recovery, fantastic. They've never worked with FileMaker. It has its own particular, issues, proclivities, limitations, etc., that you need to be aware of. So as part of your response, you want to identify all of this stuff. So you want to know things like, the obvious one, of course, I'm always going to tell you, you want to be restoring from backups. That's almost always what you're going to do. But, right, that assumes that there's a server to restore backups from. I don't know if Rick is in here or not. Perhaps not.
I haven't seen him today, but...
Okay, we were trying to chase him down for photos, just so we had something cool to show. They had a tornado. It didn't hit the office. It hit, the local power substation. And so, the building's okay, I guess. But there's not going to be power until the power company gets around to fixing it. And so that doesn't really work, right, to continue operating the business. So, if you're going to run on-site servers, you have to think about, potential issues like that. I actually can think of probably an interesting but worse one, kind of specific to California, at least for the moment, although some of the other Western states, right, we're having all of these wildfires. And so I can imagine a scenario where your disaster plan is not in place well enough. And for example, you get told to mandatory evacuate from the area where the server is. And so and if you aren't familiar with fire response, one of the things the power company will do is about the time everybody's supposed to be out, they turn all the power off. And so you can't walk away from the database and go, yeah, it'll be fine. I mean, it may be actually. If you have offsite backups and stuff, you'll be able to do a restoration in that way. But in a literal continuing the business operation, just kind of walking away and ignoring the server because you're like, well, we got told to go. And then you have the problem where if it's a mandatory evacuation, even if you don't lose the building, the power infrastructure to your building is fine. The internet's okay, all that sort of stuff. The fire department may tell you, don't come back in. And they often do that in disaster areas until they can secure the location. To make sure there's no looting and that kind of stuff. So you have to think about all of that in your planning, and it's not that you have to account for every individual little opportunity or problem that might come up, but thinking about it ahead of time, you'll be 10 times ahead of where you would be if no one had thought about it. You just got the Mac Mini, it's over sitting in the corner on Sharon's desk, and that basically runs the business, and we're doing great. And then, a series of unfortunate events happen, and now you have a very, very huge issue continuing to operate the business, if that's possible. And, so in some of these situations, people have been forced out of their buildings, and they can't come back for weeks, plural. Maybe some businesses can be down, we'll say down for weeks. Some of them can't. some of them it's a problem if it's several hours. So all right,
we do have one quick question on Twitch from Nathan. With the backups, do you use the verify and or clone options often? Can the clone backup be used for data migration?
So yeah, two-part question and good. One, the verify step is actually awesome, and I recommend that specifically in so there's a couple things. It's a sharp tool, so there's some implications to it, but I'll talk about the good part before the implications. So at the start, I would tell you, yes, do some sort of regular verify on your database. We tend to do this on the daily backup schedule, and it's actually the downside reason for it. The reason for that is because it's slow. It tends to take a while. Even if you have a screaming fast server, sometimes it'll go pretty quick. But if you're tens of gigabytes or hundreds of gigabytes for your database, it's not going to be fast no matter what kind of hardware you have. And so you need to account for that. And so it may end up being weekly instead of daily or something like that. So that's one thing. Second, I highly recommend that be turned on in combination with email notifications from your server. The reason for that is because if one of those verifications fails, you will get an email from your server about it. That's great. You need to know that immediately, because it means that you need to begin some sort of disaster recovery process to figure out, frankly, why the verify failed. If that means that, it's Friday here, so let's say I got an email last night and telling us that the database that pays me failed verification last night. Okay, so then I have to begin. I actually don't know what the remediation steps for that would be, but I think the first thing that we begin thinking about is trying to figure out what backup we need to go to get back to a known working state, and then to sit down and try and figure out how to either update the data back to where it needs to be, which would be a challenge, I think, for RCC and for many businesses, frankly. But it's better to know that and to have a known bad point, and then the previous day, if you didn't get the email, would be the known good point. And so you can start trying to figure out where things went off the rails, and you can figure out, investigate logging and stuff like that to figure out if there's something wrong. Or I don't know, very occasionally solar radiation messes stuff up. It can be that random sometimes. But thinking about that fact ahead of time, especially if the database runs your whole business, that's very important to do the thinking ahead of time before you're asked to actually respond to it. Even if you're like, well, I don't know, what would we do? Well, we'd call RCC. Okay. That's a perfectly good, that might be your plan. Especially for something weird like that. Like, yeah, if the system goes down, a lot of our customers, they can do a backup restoration themselves. Or they can go watch one of our live streams where I did that, and they can kind of figure out the paths for their own system and, get that done. Okay, cool. But for something weird where they set up the nightly verifications and then they get an email and they're like, ooh, how do we handle that? I don't know. Then you might call us. That's fine. You may also have your own internal plan for what to do with that because it's that important. And so then you would just execute that plan, try and figure it out. So, and then the second question was about the backup clones. Those are super useful if you are doing a couple different things. If you're doing like structural difference analysis of some sort, I'm kind of waiting for the tooling of that to keep up. And it's something I've talked with Richard about before. One of the reasons I'm actually really excited about this XML transformation of the databases, once we get to the point where you can really pull it all out, like the XML is a Fidelitous version of the database structure. One of the exciting things about that is that we're going to be able to use, it's a bad example, but something like Git, some kind of a source tracking system like that, to analyze changes in the database. And I think I have a suspicion the analytics from that will be very interesting because the database structure actually keeps track of things like who last not modified a field, like entered data into it, but changed the field definition, for example. And it's fairly granular within the database. And so once we get to the point where that's exposed to us, that'll be really useful. Yeah. So just to answer that question.
I think that should answer your question, Nathan. Beyond that, we got a couple comments on Discord. Peter Gaines mentioned that he's a sealed envelope with master passwords for each of his customers, which he checks pretty regularly. And then Kyle mentions about literally picking up the server and dragging it with you physically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Peter's is a good one. That's why I say, like, your disaster plan, especially if there's like a person who will implement it. You always want a backup of some sort, but it's not always reasonable for every business to actually do that. And so actually in those cases, the planning is more important rather than less, because there's no one to fail over to. So somebody actually needs to know how to do it, preferably end to end, or I suppose have us on call or something. But realistically, I would tell people to have, always try and identify the person at the organization or the people at the organization who are going to do the work, and have those people know what they're supposed to do ahead of time. One very simple way to do that, yes, is to keep all of the passwords on a sheet of paper. I always have the conversation with people about their encryption at rest passwords. Printing it out, putting it in the company bank vault or something similar. That's not actually very retrievable in an emergency. As you might imagine, you have to go get the right people that are on the account and go to the bank and withdraw and do this stuff. And so it's not a quick thing, but it is a process that can be in place in an emergency. And so emergencies, I know everyone gets very, very time pressure, and especially if you're a business where you make money based on time, i.e. the longer you're down, the less money you're making, or you're not making any money while it's down. And so the longer that time period is the bigger the problem, basically, for you. You have to think about that in your disaster recovery plans, because you can do something where it doesn't, frankly, so for some businesses, it won't frankly matter if they're down for 4 hours. If they have to do a full restoration, if they've got to call me and say, hey, Jacob, I need an AWS server now because my Mac Mini just got flooded out by hurricane whatever. Okay, right? And they can come to us, and that's an acceptable waiting time. Even tomorrow, next week for some businesses would be fine. They just, call a couple of their customers, cancel it, or revert to paper, something. Okay. But for some businesses, that's not reasonable at all. And so they need to have a much tighter plan that is more on top of dealing with any exigent circumstances, if you will, and having people identified who you're going to call, who you're going to email, text, whatever, what order those people are contacted in, that all that kind of stuff. And then if somebody's on vacation, who do we call next? All that kind of stuff. Yes, there you go. Scott Kane says all hurricanes should be named Richard. Yes. So so we're being our Mac Mini got flooded out by Hurricane Richard. It arrives in a helicopter. So be on the lookout.
At least you can always see it coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes noise. I like it. But just and so it's all stuff that you have to talk about ahead of time. So like I said, you can have a very light restoration plan, and keep credentials somewhere useful, offline. Somewhere useful, like offline, non-internet connected system of some sort. A very great non-internet connected system is a piece of paper. That's an example of one of those. But I mean it seriously, because if you've lost power at the office or something like that, and your FileMaker database is what stores all your credentials, you now have a really big issue. Same thing if all your stuff is stored in, I don't know, iCloud or 1Password or one of these, and you don't have an internet connection, and it doesn't keep them saved offline or something on your computer, you now have a serious issue. You can't get into anything if you don't have some other way to retrieve those passwords. That can be a huge issue. Not, you're just sitting there staring at the server like, great, that's cool. I guess it's Friday and I'm going home because I don't have anything to do here. And you would like to not find yourself in that position, mostly because whoever the boss is that's expecting you to be able to put the system back up again is not going to be happy about that situation. So, and it's, it's an avoidable issue with a very small amount of, early planning. But to go to a more, we'll say, in-depth restoration plan. So start with some passwords. Go further and say, all right, who gets called? If there are multiple people that could be called, great. put them on a list, maybe a ranked list. Who do you like most? No, who would be my preference for restoring that, because they are most familiar with FileMaker Server, the necessary things, and then you can go down the list from there. If you're a big enough business, you may have a team dedicated to stuff like this. Some larger businesses have entire disaster recovery teams, and so the FileMaker administrator, we'll call it the app point of contact or whatever at that business, may have to draw up for the disaster recovery team this plan. If I'm on vacation in Vienna and the server falls over and this is critical to the business, and this team comes in and they need to put it back together again, what do they do? Who do they call? Where's the documentation? All that kind of stuff. Simplest, where are the backups? Where do they go? How do I put the backup in the live folder? Oh, look, I copied and pasted it, and Windows is like, that file's open, I can't do. Okay, you need the directions like that. How do we do a backup restoration? What does that mean? You need to write, if it's not going to be you or somebody super familiar with FileMaker, you need to write out all the little steps. And that's kind of why I said earlier, you want to think about like running through those plans yourself, and then maybe even with that other team if there's opportunities for stuff like that. Because if they don't know the proclivities of FileMaker, they don't know, I need to close the database on the server before I do a restoration, they're going to have challenges getting that work done. And you ideally would not like to put them in that situation either.
Speaking of recovery plans, there's a question on YouTube, which I think is kind of not necessarily a question, but it's an interesting scenario. Michelle asked, "Our server is managed by an external CIE, so I hope they have a recovery plan."
So yes, I too hope that they have a recovery plan. I'm not going to say I have a cogent response to that, but
is there any way you can help yourself in that sort of situation?
Right. So there actually is, and it's not easy per se, but it is easy. It's an easy thing to say. It's a harder thing to do. What you can do is ask them that question. Do you have a disaster recovery plan for my server? If so, what does it look like? Maybe they don't. Maybe they're unwilling to send it to you. Maybe the answer is yes, and here's the PDF. And it can exist along that kind of continuum, or talk to the person who does it, right? You can do all that kind of stuff and vet, that makes sense, that sounds good. And if you've watched our live streams, you're halfway to being able to evaluate something like that. Also, I'm willing to take any of those PDFs and give you feedbacks, so send them over, whatever. But yeah, basically, so this is why I say it's a little difficult, because disaster recovery can cover large businesses all the way down to tiny businesses where there's maybe a person who's responsible. And so with larger businesses, they will often ask those questions before ever even contracting with that outside host. That'll be part of their vendor assessment or something like that. They'll have a little process where they check, we're it's FileMaker, we're going to just declare that it's not our problem anymore, that's the vendor's problem, essentially, to run all of that stuff. And if there's a disaster, it's going to be their issue to deal with. That's fine. But as always, with anything like that, do your due diligence. You need to make sure that that they have a plan in place, maybe, and I suppose optionally that it's good also. And there's no way to like completely eliminate that risk. Part of it's based on trust, and maybe contractual obligations. But I don't know. That's I would ask. I suppose the short answer is I'd ask, just to see. If you get a positive response and they're happy to tell you about it, you're probably in good hands, actually. If you get negative or concerning response, obviously concerning to you as a business owner, take that hint, and consider if that's the correct vendor for you, right? You can make decisions like that. One of the reasons that I try and be really good for our customers And I'm given a lot of, run with it at RCC actually. But one of the reasons I try and like figure out what's the best way to do that thing. Okay. Is because then business owners can come to me and say, hey, what do your guys' plans look like? I have an answer for that question. You all know I'm not bad at it, at least I think. And so because I teach it here, but we have documentation and stuff internally as well, both for server setup and for disaster recovery. So, and that's again back to that's why I introduced a lot of the stuff at the beginning. If you're doing it, if someone on staff is doing it, even if your vendor's doing it, somebody somewhere should have a punch list. And actually, even if you're we'll put it this way. So, for example, if in that situation, it's the vendor's problem, right? You've got a hosting company, they deal with your FileMaker, they're managing the server, the updates, all this cool stuff. Great, right? I don't have to think about it. I love it. You just pay a little extra money and somebody else handles it. That can be great. However, that system may still go down. It may be their problem to resolve it. You may be happy, you may go ask them now because I said to, what their plan is. They may present it to you. You may look at it. It may be great, right? Always still have your own punch list. And I don't mean that you're going to do the restoration because that's their problem, their job. Your employees need to know, what do we do when FileMaker goes down? How do we troubleshoot? It's an internet connection problem. It's the vendor, their server blew up. They got ransomwared. I don't know what, things happen. Do we contact them? Do we file tickets? How do we do that? Is there a web login? Do we call somebody if there's a call system and you need to call them to report the issue, are there people on the list at their business? Like, only your head admin and your CEO happen to have been put on the list, we'll say for historical reasons. And so if anyone else at the business calls in, they can't get anywhere because they're not on the list to be able to authenticate or whatever. There's situations like that. Do you keep those details up to date with the vendor? Because maybe your head admin and your CEO are doing great and they've worked there for 10 years, but at some point, you get a new head admin, that person retires, and now you have one person, the CEO, who's on the list, and one person that doesn't exist at the organization anymore, and the new head admin's not listed, right? So, and it's like, okay, we've just now routed the entire disaster response through our CEO. Not always a great plan. Can be fine. For example, RCC used to host on site, and Richard was usually, but not always, proximal to the actual server. So often he did disaster response. And so in our case, that worked fine. We're not there anymore. We're up in AWS. And so, that plan doesn't work anymore. Hold on, let's take a break.
No, you're good. Peter has an interesting comment. If you pay for it, it's their responsibility, but ask for a check to verify yourself that it exists. I've been in that situation, and the answer was, of course we have. We do a daily backup of our VM, so that's good, right?
Wrong. Yeah, wrong. Totally wrong. So, and this actually is one of the reasons that so like RCC has, there I paused. Nice. All right, hold on. Now I can take my drink of water again.
Keep drinking water. We don't need you to die of dehydration. You know how mad Richard would be at me? What happened to our IT?
I'm not dying, no. So it's a good example of something. So one of the reasons for let me kill my video and relaunch it so we can see again. There we go. Okay. So one of the good points there actually is, right, we do a daily backup of the VM, so that's good, isn't it? Wrong. So one, if your data restoration needs are more fine-grained than midnight last night, that's a problem. It's just an obvious, straightforward issue. You either need a backup that's more often than that or something, whatever, right? So one, there's that. Two, most VM providers actually are not responsible for any kind of backups or restoration or anything else. They forego all responsibility for the system except for literally operating the hardware that it runs on. And you may just get thrown off into the ocean and need to relaunch your thing if that fails. That actually that kind of as an example is how Amazon works. Lots of my customers think, oh, I'm going to call Amazon to get them to put my system back up. Amazon doesn't care about you. If you don't write them, and I mean that actually in a bigger way than just they're not going to put your system back up again. If you don't write them like $15,000 checks per month, they literally don't care. If you do write them $15,000 checks per month, you can get an engineer assigned. But that's still someone whose job it is to assist your business with like integrating with Amazon services. They're not going to help you with data restoration or any of that kind of stuff. That's not their job. That's your job. Right. Yeah. So you could pay for an SLA. Ruben and Peter are going back and forth in Discord talking about SLAs and stuff like that. That is a service level agreement, which is to say, if my whatever it is, may not even be specific to FileMaker, but if my system blows up, we can get it back up and running in how many minutes, hours, days, etc. And they'll have a guarantee on that, and SLAs often come with some kind of if we fail it, if we're not able to get the system back up and running in time, what happens? And so that may be credits against your bill. It may be they pay you cash, or zero this month's bill, or literally they begin writing checks, dollars per minute, hour, etc. to you. That'll probably be dealt with at the end of the month or something, but yeah, and so you may be subject to getting money from that just because this is so important to my business and I want you to pay me for every minute this is down because it's so critical to the operation that it stay up. And you want to know what those details are. That kind of stuff will come probably in your. You should plan it ahead of time to know what you have. Basically, that's kind of a what do you call that? Where you list all the systems out that you have in an item inventory. That's a great place for my video to stop. If you do like an inventory or something of your systems, you're gonna look at, I have this version of Windows or Mac and these this CPU and hardware. The databases are running on these systems. They have these technical requirements, etc. But the paperwork that surrounds that system is also a technical requirement, and you should think of it that way too, because almost all of the agreements that you have, either with people inside your business, outside vendors, third-party IT personnel, etc., those all bear on how the restoration goes. And so if you are doing any kind of we'll just call it on-site hosting of some sort, you need to know what all of those things are. What the details are, how quickly people are required to respond to your screaming that your business is down. That all that stuff is relevant. And even if you're not, you've officially said this is somebody else's problem, you need to know what all those details are to know what to expect when that's happening. That will help you do two things. One, if you need to get paid afterwards because they messed it up, cool. That's one thing. But also it lets you know, if it goes down, like, we have a 2-hour callback time. They may not, maybe everybody's out to lunch when your thing falls over. They may not get back to you. 1:30 p.m. Oh, okay, cool, great. Like, I get the call, hey, we saw your system's down. Sorry, we were out to lunch. It's 1.5 hours into the 2-hour window. So they've delivered perfectly on their contract, but you've been sitting here with a boat with no motor, sitting, doing nothing. Waiting. And so
yeah.
Let's see. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. Let's say it again. Amazon doesn't care about you. Yeah, correct. And I say them because most of our customers, if they're not on site, we put them in Amazon. There's a reason that they're called instances and not virtual machines. They're not meant to be, so we use them as like permanent VMs, like you might at some virtual hosting company or whatever. That's not actually what they are, which is why Amazon doesn't actually really guarantee anything with them. However, Amazon's generally awesome at hosting, and so your systems don't go down often enough that I even need to warn people about that these days. But that's technically a factoid about them. The other thing is, if you work with Amazon, I would recommend a reserved instance. The benefit to that is actually twofold. One is you save about 30% of your instance cost, which again, that's excluding hard drives and all the other little details that go into the final price, just the hourly fee for the usage of the thing. So that's dollar savings that you might like, but it comes with an additional benefit, which is if they need to do some kind of maintenance that might shut you off, you get shut off last. You're last in line. Everybody else that doesn't have a reservation, doesn't have, whatever, they get turned off first. So that's a useful thing for reliability, actually. So. And Ruben's talking about a configuration management database, which is kind of what I'm talking about. It's write down what is the configuration of your FileMaker server. So, for example, I have like a little list, right? It's the things to remember to export. It's actually like the list that you use when you're doing an upgrade. Or something like that, because you're going to build a new FileMaker server. It's the same exact set of requirements that you're trying to determine. So do you have any scheduled scripts? Do you have the details for them, because those require a username and password, for example? Do you have any server-side plugins? Do you have PHP or some other programming language perhaps that talks to the if you're running super old systems, instant web publishing, newer systems, custom web publishing, or newest systems, the data API. And where is that code? Is it on that server? Is it out? I have a bunch of customers that they have a FileMaker server on site, like a Mac Mini. And then they have some web stuff where they accept customer submissions directly into FileMaker, which is great. But the web code runs on GoDaddy or some bulk website host. They've got a WordPress and a couple files off on the side that accept that data for them. And so if that's the case, then other than making sure the either custom web publishing or data API or whatever you use, making sure that's on the new system or working again, outside of testing that, you don't have to do too much. Okay, cool. There's no PHP on the system. I don't need to put that back and re-enable it. But that's all. It's so you have to think about all the different little steps. We're kind of if it's a basic issue, FileMaker server crashed. I need written directions for how to do a backup restoration. Perfect. You can write that down. That fits on half a sheet of paper that the person or persons that might do it, they can put that in their cubicle and be done. And frankly, none of the paths or any of that stuff have changed much. And so if you have an interesting configuration, great, write it down. That's all. But the second part of that is always make sure you have all the other details too, because if you have some sort of a catastrophic failure, even if you can restore most of it, from a backup, we'll say we've got one of these magical daily snapshots and it just works and we had hourly backups on it, right? And so, it's 8-hour-old data. That's okay for my business. Cool. You go back in there, you bring the system back up, you get the databases restored, you bring FileMaker server back online for client use, and then you go in. What are you doing? You have to test and make sure everything is still working. You've got some old data in there. It may not be totally up to date, et cetera, but you're looking at that and you want to test, all right, do sending emails work? Does, whatever your processes are that are critical, you want to ensure that they operate. As a quick example of that, I upgraded, as we always joke, the server that pays me, which is like the primary production server, RCC. I did that on Wednesday last week. The Windows updates were easy. The upgrade was easy. Bringing it back up was super clean and straightforward, and it was great. No problems. But what did I do afterwards? I went and tested, because the most important thing, or one of the most important things at RCC for lead generation is you guys buy stuff from us, like our bundle, like our various products, and those are delivered over email. Well, that comes out of that exact same server. So I have to make sure that email delivery system operates before I can say, yep, server's back up again. That's part of restoration, even though, what I was doing was a Windows update. I have to verify and validate those things. And so you need to make sure that looking at your solution, talking to your users, how do they use it? What do they do? If you're not familiar with those things already, maybe you are, you need to make sure that, critical things that integrate with third parties, with plugins, with other data systems inside the company, if you have ODBC or similar type integrations, you need to make sure that all that stuff works afterwards, and plan how that works too. Things I can think of that wouldn't strictly be, straightforwardly obvious, is you can end up in situations where if you have a data process that pulls stuff in and it doesn't work in we'll say a reproducible manner, which is if you were to run it now and if you were to run it 8 hours from now and the data was different between the two, but the 8 hours from now is be like a small 50% of the data, and then 8 hours from now there'd be 100% of the data, but the 8 hours from now the first half is the same data. Those two processes should be able to run the same. You just have twice the stuff brought in on the second round. If you think about your data processes that way, then bringing it back up online, you can go, oh cool, you just turn everything back on again, and any latent data, old stuff, things that need to be updated because we restored from an 8-hour-old backup, those problems may solve themselves if you build the processes in that way. And that all of that, even though that's engineering front end, it all plays into how difficult is it to get the system back up and running. How painful is it, right? If you have data coming into your FileMaker that from a third-party system, maybe you bring records in on the data API, and you have no reasonable way to go get that data again, you may have an issue, right? If that's important. So, and so if you think about that data coming into your system, you want to make sure that either you can bring it back in again, and if you can't, you have to accept that a certain amount of that data is going to be thrown on the floor. Or you're going to have to do some sort of painful data recovery where if the system, like the example is like in a natural disaster, you may literally lose the physical server. It may not function anymore. So, someone steals it. I don't know, something like that. Those are huge issues because if that data can't be replicated, somehow you've lost it. That needs to be acceptable. And if it's not, then you have to think about your backup strategy, which we talked about yesterday. You have to think about those things in light of what is acceptable to lose. And if the answer is nothing, well, frankly, you're just going to be writing really big checks to ensure that's true. That's the big thing. And so lots of businesses, they don't want to spend that much money on it. And so they decide, some time frame is okay. We can lose it. RCC, we run hourly backups. Frankly, that actually makes Richard nervous because of how our business works, not unreasonably so. And so we could theoretically, and we did this when it was on site, when the server was on site, we did 15-minute backups. And so, if FileMaker server crashes separate from a machine loss or something like that, if just the process crashes, then I can definitely minimize data loss in that scenario because my maximum data loss essentially is about 14 minutes and 59 seconds. And if your business doesn't move that fast, that may be totally excessive. For other businesses, go into last night's daily is fine. For some, you're like trying to figure out how to make the progressives run perfectly for you because 5 minutes is your, realistically, you can, if the system's down, it'll stop accepting data and that's okay. But like, you don't want to lose the data because it's critical and important and you can't get it back. And right. So you think about all parts of it. So planning the backups and all that stuff ahead of time, and also your data restoration will bear on that. And so if you really can't lose 5 minutes of data, you got to think about those requirements ahead of time before any disaster happens. So have those conversations with your people. There are, I'll say, for amazing levels of resiliency, there are kind of solutions. So older FileMaker, and it's not, I don't believe it's in the product anymore. That's a good question I should answer. I don't think it's not in the installer anymore. So I don't know if they actually deleted the code out of it or if it's just really difficult to configure and access. But there used to be standby servers where you could set up 2 FileMaker servers next to each other, basically, and they would try and keep each other in sync. And so, if one of them died or something, we go over to the other one. Great. But it's not accessible in the current product. I think it's not present in the current product. Don't quote me on that. Of course, I'm live on air. But that may not work for you. And so the alternatives that I've seen are twofold. Things like 360works Mirror Sync can keep record data in sync. So you can use something like 360works Mirror Sync to keep the records in sync between multiple servers. We've talked about this in the context of having like a global server deployment. You have people in Australia and the US and EU and I don't know, somewhere in Singapore or something. Okay, cool. And they want to have fantastic performance, right? They want essentially a local server kind of, but to keep the actual database in sync. You can do that, but it's the same exact application to keep a hot standby somewhere else. That'd be the same integration basically, because that's what you're doing. So you can do stuff like that. I'll call it like the poor man's version of that is like something like a 15-minute backup, and then shipping that off to the other server. And maybe the database isn't live per se. You don't always like actually have it open running on the FMS on the other system or something like that. But if you have a copy of the database being put on that server every 15 minutes, you're not going to lose much data if you need to flip over to it, and you can just go have whoever your person is that's on call go and extract the zip or whatever they're going to do and pop the thing live. That'll only work under a certain size of database, but it will work for a lot of customers. A lot of customers don't actually have that much data, so those are kind of things to think about, things to plan for. You want to decide if you need the expense or not, if you want to build that or not, because any of those options where you're significantly increasing resiliency, there have to be people involved. There's probably technical integration that has to happen, and then, as always, as I'm going to keep saying it again, you want to practice everything, and so you're going to have to pay people to do that too. And so if you have staff that are your disaster recovery people or your IT people or whatever, they need to have free time in their schedule, or scheduled time in their schedule perhaps, to do things like that, to run through the data restoration steps. Hey, a meteor hit the data center that our whole company runs out of. How do we spin up a new business? How does that happen? Right? You want to make sure that is a question that there exists an answer for, especially, we'll just say, if the business is important. So I have some random tips for on-site stuff and some funny examples of natural disasters if you want to finish with that. Since
honestly, I think that would be fun.
Okay. So there's a couple tips. So I know everyone, you host up in the cloud and you're like, oh, it's not my problem anymore. Either it's Amazon's problem or maybe it's Jacob's problem to put your Amazon back up. So it's something. Okay, fine. That's we have a bunch of customers that do that. But I'll give an example of where Amazon might go down. So there's two situations I've seen them have like kind of catastrophic failures. One is actually an obvious one, which is data centers are hot and require cooling. Amazon has had their cooling systems fail in the past, and that has taken down chunks of global infrastructure when that happens. If the data center that it fails on is badly placed in the dependency graph of the various software that runs everything, that can be a real issue. Separately, once every few years, somebody blows something up at AWS, and I used to tell this to customers actually, because when that happens, it makes the 5 p.m. news and everybody knows about it. And I make the joke about that because it's like, well, if your system's down and it's Amazon's fault, you might hear about it on the news. And so you'll know, oh, I'm not, it's not me alone. Everybody's stuff blew up. Okay. And so you have stuff like that. However, cloud-hosted systems are not themselves invulnerable. So for example, they can still get ransomware. You can have a cloud system get ransomware. That's perfectly reasonable. You can have rogue employees, which is people think of as an on-site problem, but is also a cloud problem, because if somebody with, we'll just say powerful access, goes and deletes stuff, blows stuff up, nukes the database, whatever, any kind of weirdness that you could think of that might really impinge business operations, people can go do those things if they're disgruntled and they're leaving or something. Another one that is in the news this week, Microsoft's cloud, Azure, has a wonderful fundamental security issue in one of their little processes where if you send the right web request to the server, you now have root access to it, which is great. We love it. And there's no real actual remediation for that right now yet. So you have to go update a piece of software that most people on Azure didn't know existed on their system. Hopefully by the time this video is out, that whole thing will have been resolved. But that was 48 or 72 hours ago, and it's not yet. So it's the cloud isn't free. It's just different, right? Somebody else pays the power, or they amortize the power bill across different things. Okay, there's ways that you can say, it's easier to deal with, and that's true. But it's still just a computer system, and they have security issues, and people mess stuff up, and load the power wrong, and this kind of stuff. You have all those kinds of issues. Famously, actually, the NSA was standing up their big Utah data center that everyone talked about, and then suddenly stopped talking about. Shh. But one of the issues that they had when they were setting that up is they had some power problems. I don't know, something about the grid or the substation or something was set up incorrectly, and they had some weird fires when they tried to turn it on, and it delayed the opening of the building. That stuff can happen after the building's open too, so you can have power subsystem failure, and insufficient redundancy or something like that. To address, as I promised, some of the on-site stuff. I actually just want to give one tip, which is if you're running on-site servers, you should probably have a battery backup of some sort. We have some that we use. I don't know that we endorse any particular one. The short version is do your research and try and figure out what people who like battery backup systems would pick, because that's probably an easier way than learning how all of everything works with that. But the other part is, for most battery backup systems, you need to replace the batteries every 2 years. If you have a battery backup system and you don't know when the last time it was replaced, ask. And if it was a long time ago, please replace your batteries, because you probably actually do not have a battery backup system right now if it's been long enough. The batteries do wear out. Most of them are lead acid, and those the capacity of them wanes over time. Basically, it gets worse. So you want to think about that. If you are a very big business with lots of money and lots of things going through, be careful about physical access to the server, locking stuff down in that way. That is a type of disaster, right? Someone breaks in and runs off with the server. You might not call it a natural disaster because there's no tornadoes or fires or water or whatever. You're going to call your insurance company here, but it is still an attack of a sort. It is a disaster. It's a downtime, and you have to be able to put the business back together again afterwards. So, and it's a reasonable threat model. So for exciting natural disasters, I'm just going to read a quick list here. These are all things I have been told about by our customers. And I have 5 of them. So we have the tornado hit the office itself. I don't know if the server was chucked. I think Richard was asking that yesterday. We have Rick's story, which is that the tornado did not hit the office actually, which is great, but it did hit the power substation nearby, which caused weeks of power outage basically, and you can't run the server that way. So there's that. We had a customer, the big wildfires in California, I mentioned those earlier. Their office was lost. They were in Paradise, actually, which is one of the towns that famously burned down in California. That's where their primary office was. The whole building was a loss. They were not allowed back into it, and most of the town wasn't allowed back in for a long time after, because most things were a total loss. That customer actually, and I mentioned that yesterday in the stream, but that customer actually had me set their server up on a laptop, which I found very nerve-wracking and also humorous at the time. And then that turned out to have been a fantastic disaster recovery plan, because when they got told by the state, you need to leave, this fire is going to, bearing down on us right now, they closed the lid of the laptop, picked it up, and walked off. They had an employee plan in place, a documented paper one, that specified exactly what to do in that scenario. And there were certain computers that they picked up, and they had a van or whatever for the business, and they kept a battery backup in the van. And so then you take the laptop, you go plug it in to the battery backup in the van. Done. And you can then drive the server. You never shut it down. It wasn't even necessary. They took it to a warehouse that was their kind of backup site, if you will, and plugged the battery backup system into the wall again, and then started wiring it in and connecting up FileMaker Pro clients, and people were able to continue working again within hours.
Nathan says, try living here in South Africa. We have rolling blackouts,
Yep.
which we called load shedding, where the city turns off certain suburbs for 2 to 4 hours at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I made jokes about it. I visited India. I was on a class trip when I was in college, basically. But the place that we were staying, you could set your watch by the power outage every day because it was, and I'm not kidding, exactly at 8 a.m. No one ever gave me a good reason for why that happened, but the power went out for 15 minutes every day at 8 a.m. on the dot. And so they had giant batteries actually on most floors of the house that would run we'll just say the life safety critical things, the lights and refrigeration, basics. Not all the other stuff. There was a bunch of stuff that just didn't work during that 15-minute period in the house. That was it. You needed to do something, you're waiting until 8:15 when the power comes back on. There was a couple cool downtimes actually, and then we'll do those comments. You said there was one on Twitch. A couple cool downtimes. So one, a drunk driver hit the power pole outside of the business. That took them offline until PG&E could come and put them back online. There was one. The interesting one actually, and you can think about this as something that is definitely not right. We've talked about like employee stuff, hardware failures, software issues, natural disasters, if you will. But if you ran a server in Texas recently, the state decided to turn the power off for some businesses if they were non-critical businesses, right? So that's I don't know if you'd quite call it a natural disaster or what, but that's something to factor in. I expect, and I know that this happened actually, that certain other businesses, even the critical ones, may decide not to operate in that scenario and have to shut everything down. And what does that look like to continue operating business if you do so? I know a lot of businesses said, well, I don't know. I'm just making up a number here, but let's say the price of power has spiked because of this issue to $5 a kilowatt hour. If you don't want to pay that, you may decide the business goes off right now. You need to plan for things like that. What does that look like? What does pausing everything and shutting it down in a safe manner look like? Those are all plans that should be developed in advance. And maybe you don't practice that one because it's probably easy, but you do want to revisit the list on a schedule of some sort to make sure that you capture everything, that you get all the systems that need to be shut down, or all the people that need to be told, or whatever, right? Whatever the process is, you will know your business is better than me. But to be able to sit down and look at those things ahead of time, and make sure you have some kind of a list, some kind of a plan somewhere that you can execute on when unnecessarily exciting events happen. So.
Okay, there's a question from Alpha Lima on Twitch. When running the recover on a file, which file was repaired, the original file or the file labeled recovered? When I run the recover a second time, as recommended by Richard, to see what has to be manually repaired, which file do I run recover on?
Cool. When you are recovering a file, it will make a new database with the recovered name in it, unless you change it or do something with that. That is your recovered file, past tense. It has been recovered, assuming the process completes, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is when you double recover a file, which is what Richard is talking about, you are recovering the recovered file. So if you don't delete anything in this process, you will end up with my database name.fmp12, my database name recovered.fmp12, and my database name recovered.fmp12, all side by side. And so that final one, so one thing I do when I'm doing that is I set the log aside each time. So I end up with like a 1 recover and a 2 recover.log, so that I can compare the two if I need to. You can use some text analysis tools for that, or just visually eyeball it. The thing that you're looking for actually in a double recovery though is that dialog that pops up at the end of the process, if the first one says, alert, alert, there's a problem, and the second one says, this file looks great, then it probably is. And so what you do is you take that recovered file, you're probably going to rename it, just to be clear, to whatever the live file name is, and then make that file live. So, Any other questions
Hmm.
or cool comments?
I don't see any more on Twitch. There's a kind of a conversation of interest on Discord. I don't know if you see it.
Yeah, I think they're talking about a dead man switch of sorts.
Got it.
Having a process in place where the generic form of it, as we talk about it, is the bus plan. If RCC, if I get hit by a bus, what does the organization do? If you're like a person that is critical to the operations of the company, you should have that plan. That's not a FileMaker server disaster recovery plan per se, but it might be. Maybe they're the FileMaker person that runs all your stuff. If you're not a FileMaker company, but you have FileMaker applications internally or something like that, if you have knowledgeable employees, you should make sure that like the smart things that they know are written down somewhere. If they have documentation for how certain things need to be done, write those down. That's all really good planning. It's not necessarily specifically disaster recovery, but it is business continuity planning, and you should do that too. They're similar. They're related tasks that you should do for your business, which is, the reason your business is, discontinuous, I think. The reason your business is having an issue right now, it may be that your FileMaker server is down. It may be that the person that runs the FileMaker server is now out of the picture because they got run over by a bus. You want to try and factor in those sorts of concerns as well. One of the things that I do at RCC is, my hosting database has like everything in it. Almost no one has access to that. But importantly, Richard does. And so if I actually get hit by a bus, almost everything will be recoverable. Pretty instantaneously, actually. So I'm trying to cover it. This is a thing where you can go to like an entire day's training on this, but if we did an entire day's training on it, we would sit down with a business and write these plans basically. It's a big thing to do. You can, if this seems like, if you're a big business and you're like, oh shoot, we don't have any of this stuff. Well, one, start now. Two, you can hire people to assist with that. I don't even know if RCC necessarily offers that. I guess I should probably have a conversation, but that's it. That's a thing. You can hire people to assist in disaster recovery planning and stuff like that. And they'll help you with the requirements analysis and writing up the plans. You can contract them to come in and help you update them every 3 months and stuff like that. Those are, that's probably large dollar signs involved, but if you have nothing, it would be important to move on that immediately. And even if you're a small business, the takeaway from today is think about it. Think about it. Consider these concerns for your business and what you're supposed to do and when. I was going to mention earlier, RCC has a server agreement with all of our customers, and that agreement mostly says that we are not managing your server. But the reason for that is, like somebody commented earlier, a lot of businesses will think, we'll just say, I'll use RCC as the example, and the document exists because this happened once. So like it's not random. So we had a customer who I don't know, had a challenge with their database or something. It didn't blow up or anything. It wasn't super bad. But they came to us and going, hey, fix it. And we were like, huh? Because we set their server up for them, 2.5 years previous or something, and had not interacted with them since. And essentially, either through miscommunication, not clarifying on our end, misunderstanding on their end, whatever, it doesn't really matter. They thought we were taking care of their server, like updates taken care of, managing. We had been doing no such thing, of course. We don't do that, actually. So the only service along that line that we do is kind of a backups check that you can hire me to do stuff. That's fine. But I mean, on a, you pay, like an MSP or something, you pay me some dollars per month to maintain your server or whatever. We don't have that service. It's not a thing that we offer. So, and they thought somehow for free, paying us no money, that we had been doing that for 2.5 years. And we're very surprised to be informed that that was not the case. And so you have to consider that. That's why I say talk to your vendors, figure out what they do, what your relationship is with them, and stuff like that. We call it a server agreement, and humorously, the point is to clarify that we don't actually have an agreement here. But you should put that in writing, right? If they're not, if you're thinking that Amazon's going to put your FileMaker server back up again and when it crashes, you're mistaken. And that may be true for a lot of other hosting companies, unless it's, specifically a FileMaker hosting company. I don't know, FMP host or what, like I don't want to use them as an example necessarily because I don't know what their policies are, to be honest. But if you're hosting with one of those companies, you should make sure what their recovery plans are. I am aware of one of the other, like the big FileMaker hosting companies in the industry. I think we talked about this on a previous live stream, who got ransomwared, and the backups were ransomwared. And I'm not certain, but I think they had difficulty getting all the data back. So make sure that they're thinking about that, basically. So yeah, so if you guys don't have any other questions, we can kind of land the plane here. But all I would say is any planning is better than none at all. You want to make sure you have some kind of plan. And better than some kind of plan, a plan that has been tested once or twice, and better than that, one that is tested regularly by the people involved, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Each additional step is an improvement over the previous one. And so if all you can do today is to write down all your critical passwords and put them somewhere safe, you're already better than you came into this live stream. Because if you didn't have that before, then it's already an improvement, because someone other than you, if you were the one that gets hit by the bus, can try and put the business back together. We actually have one, even on that point, we have a contract with a customer where they wanted to put somebody on contract as a kind of party of last resort, if you will. If their executive team gets knocked over, if their IT people can't hack it, if the whole restoration, the whole thing, just giant cascading failure, right? Whole thing fails. They can call RCC. RCC will do up to a certain dollar amount, basically, of heroics to try and get them back up and running. So those are, yeah, I don't, we've only had one of those, and I'm not specifically like advertising that as a service, but we got asked by a client for that, and so we're like, sure, okay, why not? And so, because everybody's clear about what the call chain is, we're last, right? We get called if nobody else can get it done.
I think we're probably good, and I can let you be free for your Friday instead of dragging you into several hours worth of live stream.
Free, really?
Well, almost. You got a couple hours.
I know. I have a couple hours of work to do.
So you'll be free from this.
I have 7 new emails over here that are customers demanding things from me. No, I have a client I'm going to work for this afternoon, actually.
Okay.
They're trying to, we're on the upswing to a, what do you call that? It's kind of a vertical market app, I guess. It's a software solution built in FileMaker, technically, that is saleable to third-party customers. And their customer base is going to be governments and government agencies. And so we usually kind of caution people to think very carefully about a vertical market app, because most of them fail, basically. And this one has a really high chance of succeeding because the numbers can just be really big, because you can just ask for really big numbers because they're government agencies, and that's, penny pinching isn't actually how that works for the most part. So everybody's meant to be happy. What is for a remote? Sorry, this is Terry's question. Final one, and then we'll land it. Let's see. I've got another question for a remote connection to a FileMaker server admin console. Figured out it's not possible to connect via Chrome. Never heard of that. And Safari seems to work, and you think it's a certificate issue. You're trying to do it on the LAN. No, the correct answer is get a real SSL certificate and set your network up in a way where you can connect to the server using that DNS name or whatever. There are workarounds that you can probably do today. Actually, Chrome is the workaround I recommend for people, because that and Firefox are the only browsers that will not fight you too much to override their SSL stuff. The problem that you will run into, though, is FileMaker Server, modern versions of it, send an HSTS header. It's called HTTP Strict Transport Security. What that means is when your browser makes a successful secure connection to the server, it will no longer, for a time period specified by the server, for a time period specified by the server, it will no longer connect in an insecure manner. It will refuse. It will not let you do it. It doesn't matter what you are trying to do, it will not let you. The way that I work around that is by launching, for example, an incognito window. That's the easiest way. Safari, actually, once it's gotten into that scenario, will not under any circumstance let you override. It will let you override on first connection if you jump through 7 hoops and type your user password in and do all this stuff. But Chrome is usually my workaround because you can launch an incognito window for it. But again, the real solution is to use an actual SSL certificate. It is frankly not recommended at this point to not have one. I should say that the other way. You should have an SSL certificate in your server, period. That's the end of the recommendation. So do that, plan to do it if you don't already. It doesn't matter if it's not on the internet or something like that. You lose a bunch of security properties by not being able to verify the host name of the server, even if it's just a host name and it's not like a DNS address or something like that. Unfortunately, the tools to actually do what I've just recommended you to do are basically enterprise. And so if you don't have either expensive networking hardware, expensive server operating system subscriptions, et cetera, they're difficult to impossible to actually implement. That is an existing complaint I have. It's not really Claris or anybody else's fault, but they're trying to push everybody in that direction and then not giving them the tools to actually make it happen. So.
I think that should hopefully answer your question, Terry.
Yeah, correct. For Peter Geens, a real SSL or a free one, I would recommend a real SSL, but mostly because Let's Encrypt, which is the free one, you're going to have to update it every 60 to 90 days. If you're cool with that, fine. I'm not, and we're not, and we don't trust automatically rebooting FileMaker Server, which is what's necessary to totally automate that. You could probably do it fine, and I think a couple of our engineers actually do that. One of them in particular has a Mac Mini server at his house that he has a Let's Encrypt installed in FMS. It works on a technical sense. It's just you have to pull down the new certificate, install it, restart FileMaker Server cleanly and safely, et cetera, et cetera. There's a script out there on GitHub that will do that for you on a Mac, actually. And you're welcome to try it out. I'm not going to endorse it and not super excited about supporting it when it blows up. We frankly need improvements in the server product from Claris to make that type of automation safe. And that I've not seen that yet.
Live stream talking about server improvements. So. Yeah,
correct. Well, I don't know if they watch enough of my live streams, they'll see my comments and know where to target things. It's a lot of the things that I desire from the server platform. It mostly seems to not crash and stuff like that anymore. It seems pretty stable. Mm-hmm. And I've been told they put a ton of work into the new versions, resolving literally stuff like that. So it's great. But there's no work on the ops at all. Operations, automatic restarts, the server. Just setting it in a way where it could automatically restart for something like an SSL install, and then it being smart enough to stop if there's any kind of an issue in that case. But if it went perfectly, it can run all the way through, right? I don't want to be put in a situation where it comes up, it actually crashed when it went down. It comes back up again. It passes its own consistency check and runs right off into the sunset. I don't want that. I want if it thinks it needs to run a consistency check at startup, it should stop. It should just not. And I don't mean like it shouldn't run the consistency check. I mean, I want the auto start to be more subtle than it actually is currently. So stuff like that would really help with issue detection, where someone's not staring at the server all day, where an issue will become obvious. So, what now?
I think.
Yeah.
Are we good?
Let's see. Yeah, 19.3. That's correct. You can do the better part of the SSL stuff in the web UI. Again, they brought that back just recently. Yep, correct. I think my video is frozen anyway. Perfect. Good time to end.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this Friday. Jacob, seriously, thank you so much for talking to us for an hour and a half in depth about this and answering all the questions. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. You all have a lovely day, and we will probably, I'll be seeing you next week. Jacob isn't scheduled next week as far as I'm aware. So, bye.
Just stepped up the whole way. Calm, cool, collected the quarterback. Great read, good patience. More importantly, great job up front protecting this quarterback to give you a chance. And that's all you can ask for.
Try to rally down 10. 9:25 to go here in the fourth. Short motion by Amendola from the left. Brady takes the shotgun snap, stands in, throws it left for Amendola, reaches up and snaps a high throw and lands inside the 10, rolling to the 9. Ball slightly behind him, but Danny makes the grab.